all for coming to hear someone like me speak. This is the first speech of this kind I've ever done. I've acted on stage, but I've never had to play myself, so it feels a little odd. Thank you so much, Mr. Sheshadri, and thank you, Mr. Madhu, for your very generous introduction and for reading an article that I wrote about coming back and writing that beautiful introduction, which makes me sound so much better than I really am. Thank you so much, which you sent out on email. Apparently, I got Shakespeare in the womb. My mother would read aloud from Shakespeare plays and sing to me when I was still inside her. So this love of literature is something, poetry, literature and theatre has been a part of me since before I was born. So I'll begin today with the words of a Spanish poet, Lorca. I quote, "Those dark sounds are the mystery, the roots that cling to the mire that we all know, that we all ignore, but from which comes the very substance of art." This is what Lorca says in his celebrated essay about the duende. It's a Spanish word. It means, literally it's a folk creature, a mischievous hobgoblin or a spirit. He describes the duende as a mysterious force that everyone feels and no philosopher has explained. The duende, the poet tells us, is, I quote, "a force, not a labor, a struggle, not a thought. I heard an old maestro of the guitar say, the duende is not in the throat, the duende surges up inside from the soles of the feet." Meaning, it's not a question of skill, but of a style that's truly alive. Meaning, it's in the veins. Meaning, it's of the most ancient culture of immediate creation. That's the end of the quote. Far away from Lorca's beloved Spain, it is in search of the duende that I left Chennai in 1996. It is in search of the duende that I came back in 2011. I'm an atypical one-time NRI. So I don't know what lessons you're going to get. A couple of people have said they have had children in the US, but I'm an odd bird. So I don't know if my life is going to be exemplary in any way, but I'll share my story with you anyway. In 1981, my parents moved back to Chennai from Hyderabad, and I with them. I grew up speaking Tamil and English, decently fluent in spoken Hindi and understanding some Sanskrit. I studied Carnatic music and Bharatanatyam growing up. And I was also simultaneously fascinated by British literature and obsessed with rock and indie music through my teenage years. That was my big rebellion. I stopped singing Carnatic music and started singing rock music. This was back in the day, before the days of YouTube. So, and imagine in a family so steeped in Indian classical music, it was a major rebellion. After that, Mr. Madhu has said, I went to WCC for my BA in English, and then I did an MA in English Language and Literature in Stella Maris. And then I finally left Chennai for Columbus, Ohio. And looking back, I see that move too was a rebellious attempt to shake off the weight of genealogy and history. One finds one can't really do that. It always catches up with you, history and genealogy. My great-grandmother, Rukmini Krishnamurthy, was a huge part of my life growing up. And she would come to Hyderabad when I was a child. And she was alive till recently. She told me stories from Hindu mythology, stories from the Kamba Ramayanam. She taught me songs and poems, some of which were traditional Tamil songs, but so sort of passed down from grandmothers to grandchildren, I suppose. But some of them she had actually written herself. And, the one about the Chittukuruvi, which apparently she herself had penned. I didn't know. So my first contact with a real life writer was probably her. I mean, of course my mother, but her, senior. She also had a secret stash of snacks. She had kadla urunde, bananas, fried patani, and boiled sweets. And she would, they would emerge from the cupboard, and she would give only very special people those snacks. They were hidden away, but even the grown-ups didn't know about them. And she would let me lie on her tiny bed when I visited her home in Nungambakam. And the bed was always very neatly made with pillows rising to one side, from one side like Mount Everest. She used to prop her legs up on them, I think. Anyway, but getting on that bed was also a very special privilege. She would let me sleep in it. So that's one of my earliest experiences with storytelling, always with her, and I, remember her with great fondness and great love, always. The older generation of family and friends I grew up among, in and around Kalakshitra and the Theosophical Society. After we moved, we lived in Adyar and then moved all the way to Kotivakam. So we just kept going further and further south. Was an unworldly generation. I remember this generation very clearly. These people like Rumi Devi Arundale, Shankara Menon, Kamla teacher, Padu teacher, all the people at Kalakshitra. My grandmother taught there. These people lived austere lives, steeped in daily rituals of intellectual and artistic and spiritual practice, removed from the workaday world. And among them, there were writers, politicians, theosophists, environmentalists, animal welfare activists, artists from all around the world. I, at the time, never thought it was odd that kooky spiritualists who believed in theosophy would accost me and out of the blue talk to me about the astral life of plants. I read a lot. I met these sort of unworldly, otherworldly creatures all around me on a daily basis. And this early exposure or indoctrination or inoculation, if you will, meant that all my life I felt more comfortable around eccentrics and oddballs than so-called normal people. Maybe that makes me eccentric and an oddball myself.
You do well in this one.
Huh?
You do well in this one.
Oh, great. Sign me up. Okay. So as intellectually expansive as this world was, it was also a very small world. A world where you knew everybody the minute you walked into the room. This was the paradox. And everybody knew who I was. And as I progressed from adolescence to adulthood, the textbook definition of adulthood, I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I think I realized that this legacy and burden, it's both, is something I cannot avoid, and I think I'm coming to terms with it. So I grew up surrounded by contrasts, wealth and poverty, conservatism and iconoclasm, austerity and ostentation, celebrity and obscurity, both. And one particular memory that has stayed with me from that time is that I was 15 and I went to a very posh elite school. After having been in Besant Arundale when I wore a Pavada Davani, I was in Sishya, and I had all these very wealthy friends, and my parents were middle class. And they were going on an outing that my parents didn't want me to go on. And so I was very angry about not being given permission. So I was at home, and sort of to console myself, I was looking at these old crumbling photo albums. And I found an old, I was dusting off the silverfish, back in these old albums where the photographs were inserted into those clamps on the sides. And I found this old black and white photograph of M.S. Subbulakshmi with some other people in it. And I remember Appa coming into the room and saying, that's K.V. Narayan Swami and K.V. and Mama, and that is Ravi Shankar. And then he said, and I said, who's the white guy next to him? And he said, that's George Harrison, who was in MS's old house in Chennai, but nobody knew who he was. They just thought he was one of Ravi Shankar's hippie disciples. So he came here and went, and he got upacharams, and nobody knew that he was a Beatle. So in some sense, that was the world I fled. This world in which there were these strange contrasts, these strange anomalies, this feeling of suffocation, at the same time this feeling that I had entry into an entire universe. I think I needed something different, and I was very young then. So I took refuge in another world. I went to Columbus, Ohio, which people there, they'll say only cows and corn are available. And some potatoes. It's cow town, and it's in the Midwest. And Mr. Madras asked me to devote some time to that period in my life, so I'll do so now. A big part of that experience had to do, obviously, with grad school. I went to Ohio State University. I spent 15 years in Columbus. I came back in 2011. And I went there to do an MA in journalism. I remember making the decision to go back to English at the time, to English studies. I had actually gotten into the University of Pennsylvania to do a PhD in communication, and somehow thought that was the better line. But then I walked among the English stacks, the literature stacks in the library one day. I strayed into them by accident, and I saw titles like The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction and The Laugh of the Medusa. And suddenly I found tears coursing down my cheeks. I had been missing this world. The world of journalism, the way it was taught, was there was a lot of qualitative and quantitative analysis, media effects analysis, statistics, polling. So it was very removed from anything I'd done before, and I suddenly realized I had to go back to literature. So I decided then to apply to the English department at Ohio State. It was late in the day for PhD applications, but because I had a few acceptances in communication, they sort of expedited the process and admitted me into the PhD program there in English. I ended up studying I ended up writing about Kalki's novels and their contribution to nationalism in the 1940s. So it was odd. I was sitting in the Midwest in this little town, which is much bigger now. It's a huge university with about 60 to 70,000 students every year. But with all the research resources in the world, and I was studying Chennai and what was going on in Chennai in the 1940s. So I did that for my dissertation. I read about the Bhakti period. I did a lot of really deep, sustained, serious study of the history of the subcontinent, in particular South India. And I learned more there about South India than I did all the years living here, perhaps, in some ways. In other ways, I was very lucky and blessed to have people around me, cultural informants around me. And so, at this point, I finished my PhD. I was teaching. I got into a tenure-track job. What the PhD gave me, a friend of mine, a poet, Tom Cruiksma, he's a very interesting character. He can speak Tamil. He's translated Aveyard. He also speaks fluent Spanish. He's a magician and a pianist and a poet, and he lives in Seattle. He's Japanese, Okinawan origin. Not Indian origin, strayed in and loves Tamil literature and recites Andal Pasharam in the morning. So this friend of mine said what the PhD or the MFA does for you is it gives you the luxury of time to be with your thoughts, to work out ideas and arguments. You read widely, you take classes in different departments. I got to work with some amazing professors. I learned about mentorship. I had fabulous mentors at this time, gurus who were extraordinary. They gave so much of themselves and their time to me, my ideas, my writing. They were staunchly behind their students, and I learned what it was to be a good teacher from a lot of those people. I don't know if I'm half as good as they are, but I was lucky. Jim Phelan, Chadwick Allen, Jean Holland. I had some fabulous professors there. I also developed a love of camping when I was in Ohio. I went regularly on camping trips where we would stay out 5-6 days in the wild without phones, without anything, just surviving. And I also developed a love of pool, as in billiards pool, because there was a little cafe next to my house where I used to sit and grade papers, and I taught myself to play pool, and then I ended up playing in a pool league in the American Pool Players Association. and I used to go out every Tuesday and play in this tournament. It was a lot of fun. I made a lot of different kinds of friends because of this particular little cafe next to my house. People who, you wouldn't sit down and have a meal with here because the economic divides are so make it so difficult to do so. But a lot of laborers, farm workers, roofers, plumbers, they were all really good friends. We used to all play pool together, and I was the lone Indian in that whole lot, running around Ohio playing with all these people from the lower socioeconomic strata. I also really appreciated university culture, the intellectual ferment of a university, the ways in which your professors celebrate your ideas and want you to contribute something original to the field in which you're specializing. They push you to do that. They push you to read widely and deeply and to discover new things and actually make some kind of contribution, rather than, learning by rote. The discipline of that is very important. But after a stage, you're thinking about scholarship not as regurgitation, but as actually having something to say, however small. Even if you're continuing a tradition of scholarship, finding your voice, for that, the PhD was a wonderful experience. I wrote a lousy dissertation. Everybody who has ever written a PhD dissertation will tell you that. But that journey is so important. Like understanding the past of your field, situating yourself in its present, and seeing what can come in the future is a fantastic opportunity. It was for me. As Mr. Madhu said, I loved all this about my university life, and I was all set to embrace a tenure-track job and that life. I mean, it's a great life. You get your summers to do research, you get to teach. But slowly, I started realizing that something was wrong. Somehow the air, all the stuff that people write about in poems, and all the Indian English writers write about feeling displaced. I think a lot of people who have family in the US, they will tell you that your sons and daughters, they will tell you that it doesn't feel quite right. A lot of people have this feeling. A lot of people assimilate and acclimatize and are fine, but a lot of people, for me, that feeling never went away, especially since I was studying South Asia. I felt a bit like a fraud. I felt like I shouldn't be, I haven't spent any part of my adult life at home. But home is my object of analysis, and that's not really okay. I should spend some time, I should immerse myself in this context. Also, the thing that I didn't like about US academia is that it's an ivory tower. There are much better models of sort of public intellectuals who are also academics in Asia than there are in the West. In the West, nobody takes an academic seriously. Here it can be that way, but there is also a space, or at least I felt this, there's a space here to intervene in life, in all its richness, and be a part of life, not cut off in some ivory tower university doing your research. That never engaged me. And I found that my trips home and my work in theatre were making me feel like I wanted more and more to bring my creative life and my scholarly life together, and there weren't opportunities for that in the US as subspecialized as things get there. And I felt that those avenues and doors were more available to me. The doors were open, the avenues were available here in Chennai than they were in the US. So, and nobody was surprised, including my PhD advisor, with whom I was dreading having this conversation, that I'm going back, I'm quitting the tenure-track job. I would have gotten tenure the year that I left. But he was just not surprised. He said, I think your work is in India, so I think you should go there now. So I came back with a sense of mission, but no concrete plan. So I ended up coming back, working a year in theatre. My mother is a playwright and a director. I've been acting in her plays. I've been slowly working my way around all aspects of theatre. I'm slowly learning about lighting, at least enough to prompt the lighting designer with lighting cues. Sound, so I'm learning to work the soundboard. And that will be a lifelong passion for me. I recently signed on with an IT company, which was a sort of a surprising move even for me. But this IT company has just started a learning and development unit. So they want me to take a non-HR approach to learning and development, perhaps something that's more built on my academic experience, so that we can have some continuing education modules for developers, in some way to make the company an exciting place to work in. So the developers, the solution architects, the technical architects, the designers, they all have better conversations with each other. More innovative and creative work happens in the company. It's a mid-sized privately held company with a quirky CEO who thought it was a good idea to have someone like me in the mix. I'm sort of a loose cannon there. But I find it fascinating. It's a specialized language, the language of technology. I'm having to wrap my head around that and learn a completely new way of communicating. I mean, for somebody who's essentially been a communicator all my adult life, it's humbling, and I actually love that. I think every 10 years everybody should take up something new and try to do it. If you're good at what you do, you realize how long it's going to be before you get any good at this new thing that you're trying. It was like that with pool, and it's like that now for me with the world of technology. But it's a wonderful challenge. I think a writer or an artist is not like other people in one way. That is, no experience is a waste for a writer or a performer or an artist, because you're learning something about a new world, you're learning to inhabit different lives, you're developing empathy, you're developing ways in which to understand how human beings respond, and you're developing a metacognitive awareness. You're understanding, you're thinking about thinking. How do people work? How do people create? How do people specialize? How do people solve problems? And that knowledge adds a richness and depth to one's performance. Do I need to stop?
5 minutes.
5 more minutes? So the work at Pramati is a recent challenge. I'm trying to work up some specialization and skill in this work, and it's very exciting. And the other work I do is I do try to keep my feet wet in the area of teaching and academics. So I do teach periodically once a year at the Asian College of Journalism. I teach a literature and human rights course. So I teach sort of the history of human rights. I mean, this is from my area of specialization, post-colonial studies, how sort of human rights discourse emerges in the West. So you have, the rights of man, and you have the French Revolution, and you have these ideas of individualism. But all the actual human rights struggles are happening in the colonies. So this irony of the fact that these democratic ideals and these ideas of the sanctity of human life are emerging here while atrocities are being perpetrated in the colonies. So we look at how writers in different times cope with questions of human rights since colonization, European colonization. So I keep that going. And then finally, this is a project where I'm joined by 4 others of my generation. It's called the Sahridaya Foundation. It's headed by Shijit Krishna, who's a Bharatanatyam dancer and choreographer, and a very dear friend. He has started this organization for the classical arts, where we have about 20 students now who are learning Bharatanatyam and Carnatic music with us. We're starting to build a little bit of theatre into the dance and music students' lives. We're also doing some outreach work with slum children in Besant Nagar. And this is a wonderful experience for me because with my mother's theatre repertory, just as repertory, we have name recognition. My mother is well known in the world of the arts, and theatre never pays, but we don't struggle as an organization for sponsorship in the way we have to at Sahridaya. That learning curve is quite fantastic for me in terms of we're the next generation. Shijit, his wife Jyotishmati, myself, Manjari, who's a very senior dancer, C.V. Chandrasekhar's daughter, is with us. And then the fifth is Anjana Anand. Together we're trying to take culture forward in meaningful ways, in ways that have contemporary relevance. And this is work that's very dear to my heart. And I'm happy to do it. And then finally, I just want to end by reading out this one exchange between a very dear friend of mine, Elizabeth Wardle, who was my colleague at the University of Dayton. We've stayed friends. She's since moved on to the University of Central Florida. She is in her early 40s and she just became full professor, which is quite a remarkable achievement. Usually it takes much longer than that. And she's a wonderful scholar, very good friend. So in the context of her achieving the most senior most position a professor can at a very early age, we've been talking, and this exchange between us is what I wanted to share with you. I said, am I happy? I don't know. It's because she's asking me how things are with me. I don't know. It's painful to try and find yourself what you really want. I think, at least for me it is. I need to write. I'm so damn busy figuring out all this tech stuff. I go home with a headache every day to theatre stuff. And then I flop into bed. And then Liz replies, it is hard to find yourself. Basically, I just find myself wondering, is this it? Is this all there is? What am I missing? So maybe turning 40 prompts such soul searching, and maybe I'll search my soul again when I turn 50. But I guess one thing I'm grateful for is the ability to straddle worlds, both in terms of geographically, India and the United States. They're both home now, though I haven't been back since 2011. But more than that, I'm constantly trying to straddle selves: writer, actor, scholar, teacher, singer. And that balancing act seems to continue. This past weekend, two of my colleagues, they're all 27, they're like my students, they're 20 years old, young programmers and designers. And two of them made a 4-minute film in 48 hours for a competition. They asked me to act in it. So my weekend was spent doing that with them. And so they asked me, are you glad you came back? And I said, I don't know. Nikita reminded me of this today. I said, I'm hanging out with a bunch of people half my age making short films about mad mommies. I don't know if it's a good decision that I came back. Thank you very much.